Alright, so I'll be going over the assignment for topic 4. Um, so how I set this up is I did the original graph, and then afterwards I put down my changes, and then I did a final report and then presented that change. So first I did a histogram. Oh, so my data set is for student test scores, and I compared those test scores in comparison to different variables. So the first one was just comparing the different test scores, and I did a histogram for that. And so when I first made it, the default colors are kind of hard to read, and it's also kind of it's very busy down here, especially with this second layer, the reading scores, as they're very related to the writing scores. So when I made this second chart, um, I made the reading scores darker, and the overlying writing scores have more transparency, which is done with the alpha variable, um, just so it's easier to read. And then I also added a average line so that you can, because by just looking at this, you can't really tell the average of the scores, like which one's higher or lower. Like even the blue, which is the math scores, you can't really tell it's lower than the others because it has a higher peak. Um, but by indicating in this legend here that they're the average scores, you can tell that the math scores are lower than the reading and writing scores, which I put into my final report, um, and which is the what I would be saying to the audience. Um, and then from there, I did a violin plot for the genders versus the test scores. So here's the original. By default, I just added in the legend, and then the default colors were blue and orange. So then when I made my changes, I changed it so it's more like in relation to the universal colors for female and male, with female being pink and male being blue. And then I drew attention to the outliers, the lower test scores amongst female students in comparison to male students. And then I also showed that, or drew attention to the fact that male students on average tend to have a higher median score um, compared to the females for math, but it's the reverse for the other subjects, reading and writing. And then I also made a bar chart for comparing the average scores amongst the different race and ethnicity groups. Um, so at default, these x-axis labels are rotated at a weird angle. So I had to go in there and by doing the plot, by changing the x ticks, I put it to 0 so that made the labels horizontal so that you can read it much easier. And also I also moved the legend. It was overlapping the data set. I don't know why by default it does that. So in future charts that I make as well, I'll always be moving the legend over to the side so it doesn't cover up any of the data. And then I also added a grid so that you can kind of read the values better, because just by looking at this, they kind of at first glance seem like they're all the same or very similar. But we can get a better view of this by adding the grid. So we can see that group A and B ethnicity groups tend to score lower than the other ethnicity groups, and I drew attention to that in my final report to the audience, suggesting that these groups might need extra assistance with education due to like language barriers, things like that. And then next I did a line chart comparing the test scores with the parent educational level. So as we can see, the education completed by the parents tend to have students that test more poorly compared to those who had a higher level of education. And again, I moved the legend, added the grid, and then drew attention to the audience the fact that students whose parents have lower test score, lower education, may need further assistance due to things such as having less educational tools outside of work, insufficient help at home, mostly just less resources at home outside of school. And then next I did a scatter plot comparing the each of the subject scores to one another. So for example, reading and writing, and then writing and math, and then reading and math. And when I remade the tables, I changed the colors so you can see we're comparing different things. And then I also added transparency to the plot, so you can see that the more darker dots mean there's more data points on that spot. And then as compared to here, it just looks like, you can't really tell. And then also when I made my final report to the audience, I drew attention to the reading and writing scores being more closely clustered together, which shows there's more of a correlation between the two as compared to when you compare the other subjects like reading and with reading and math and writing, it's more spread out. And then I also drew attention to the audience to the positive trend, which shows that even no matter which subject you're comparing, the lower you score, the more likely you are to score lower on the other subject, and vice versa. The higher you score, the more likely you're going to score higher in the other subject. And then I did a bar chart for the average test scores by lunch type. Again, I had to rotate these over when I remade it, and then added outlines, added the grid, moved the legend. And then when I drew attention to the audience was the fact that free or reduced lunch students tend to score lower than the standard, and that's kind of a similar case to the parents' educational level. So students who are free or reduced lunches may have less access to tools at home or resources to further their education. And then for the final chart, I did the test preparation course completion versus the average scores. So again, similar change to the previous one. I added the grid, moved the legend, added outline, rotated the labels, and what I drew attention to the audience was the fact that those who completed the test preparation course tend to score higher on the left-hand side here. So students that we saw previously in the previous charts that tend to have lower scores, whether it be due to, for example, the lunch type or the racial background, things like that. So those students should be required to complete the test preparation course, as those students who did test or did complete that course did tend to score higher.